I have a pretty aggressive forecast pre-bust again of $60, which may seem unbelievable given what we've dealt with this last decade, but $60 between now and the bust. And then, and I've said if it breaks above 60, you could run to 75 very quickly. So post bust, I think silver could get to $500, gold could get to 20,000. But people just have to understand it's not a straight line. There's this bust in between.
I wanted you to give us your thoughts on gold's rise here and how you see the gold market performing for the rest of the year and beyond.
Yeah, I think gold looks great here. I think it's about to break out. That's obviously made a new closing high this week. And I see the dollar rolling over, interest rates after a backup beginning to move down again. And I think they'll go to probably go towards 3% before they correct again. So you've got the dollar and interest rates working in the right direction for gold. And I think that's the signal that gold's about to break out of this trading range it's been in for quite some time. And my forecast is 3,000. I've got a forecast of a global bust starting probably later this year into next year. And I just called a pre-bust forecast of 3,000 on gold. And to me, that's a conservative estimate. I think if anything, it's going to exceed that.
So do you think in the case of a global bust that we will see gold fall along with the rest of the market, at least initially, before potentially climbing back up? Or how do you see that scenario playing out for gold?
Yeah, global bust is in my definition of a global bust is something that's worse than our typical recession, but not drawn out like a depression. So it might feel like a depression, but it'll probably be contained in a 12 to 18 month time frame with a lot of financial a big financial piece to it. So sort of like 2008-9, but probably worse. So in that kind of a scenario, I think pretty much all assets other than government guaranteed treasuries and the US dollar, which will get a flight to safety bid at that time. Other than those things, I think most other assets are going to get hit. So gold will get hit, probably not as hard as the equity markets, certainly not as hard as the equity markets, but I think could get hit pretty hard, but it's from that higher level.
And you mentioned dollar weakness. What are the signs you're seeing right now that lead you to believe the dollar could be headed lower?
Yeah, it's mostly, the charts, the technicals suggest that it's rolling over. And I've expected that. We had that big move down a couple of years ago from 115 down below 100 on DXY. And, we've spent many months here kind of consolidating that. It started to go again, and then it had another counter trend rally. I think that counter trend rally has pretty much run its course, and it just looks now like the dollar's getting heavy. And once it gets going, I suspect we'll see it down to the mid 90s pretty quickly. And then from there, down to 90. And from there, I have a forecast again, probably a 2024 forecast of 80. So, from 103 and change now, down to 80 is a big drop. And that will certainly help gold and silver.
Are there any currencies outside of the US dollar that you see performing well up ahead and under this scenario of a global bust, or will it kind of be a case of them all sinking together?
Well, let's put it this way. Keep in mind the dollar weakness is pre-bust. So you've got a big move down in the dollar coming here. So pretty much all the currencies versus the dollar will be up, including the yen. The euro looks good. The British pound looks good. I think Canadian and Aussie dollars will trade up pretty aggressively if you've got to move down to 80 in the dollar. So it's a two-step process. I don't want people confused. You've got this big down, but then you've got a big up during the bust. And so during the bust, it's going to be the reverse of what we're going to see here. The dollar could go back to 120 or higher. And virtually all the other currencies I mentioned will be going down pretty hard. So it'll be a flight to safety. As much as the dollar has some problems ahead, and we all know what everybody's worried about. in terms of the Russia and the BRICS and China, et cetera. Saudi Arabia maybe moving away from dollar, et cetera. All of that, I think, is going to weigh on the dollar, but not during the bust. I think we still become the place of refuge if things start turning pretty rough.
Well, I would like to get your long-term forecast on this trend of de-dollarization that seems to be occurring. Different people place different levels of emphasis on it. Some believe it's kind of not something that's even that important, and the US dollar is going to be around in a significant way for a long time to come. I'm wondering what your thoughts are there with the BRICS nations, Saudi Arabia, as you mentioned, divesting themselves of the dollar when it comes to international trade. Is this a significant event in your view? How long do you think it's going to take to play out before it has a major impact? And is this ultimately a tailwind for gold?
Yeah, I certainly think the dollar will come under pressure in the second half of this decade. You get through this global bust, and I think that will be the peak in the dollar, and it'll be all downhill from there. How fast is hard to know because this is going to be a global bust, and as we know, when we catch cold, the rest of the world catches pneumonia, and this is going to be us catching pneumonia. So the rest of the world's going to be in really rough shape. I just don't see where China, Russia, or anybody else is in a position to replace the dollar as a trade currency. So they can talk about it all they want and try to plot against the dollar all they want. I think it's going to be a long process. So certainly the next 5 years, the dollar is still going to be, the king of the hill in terms of trading, in terms of trade. Um, as we get to later in the decade, I'm forecasting a huge inflation cycle as a result of what the Fed has to do, and also central banks, frankly, have to do during the bust to counter the bust and pull us out of it. It'll be a free falling financial system during the bust, and so they're going to be printing and printing and printing. Probably my estimate is be something 4 or 5 times what we saw in 2020, 21. So, I mean, 20 trillion coming out of the Fed is my estimate. Could be a little less or more. But that kind of number is going to trigger, and all central banks doing something similar proportionally, that's going to trigger a huge inflation cycle that will far surpass, I think, the early 80s and certainly what we've seen of late. And so as you get to the end of the decade, you could be looking at, high double-digit interest rates, high double-digit inflation, and obviously a budget that can't be serviced, or we're going to really struggle. Again, it's a worldwide problem, but focused on the U.S., I think we're going to have a hard time making the case that the dollar is something sound and where people want to be. So, later in this decade, I think the dollar is going to be under a lot of pressure. You could see it that DXY could be under 50 by the end of the decade, and then keep going from there. So I understand the concerns about de-dollarization. I understand all of that. I just think those that are in that camp and think it's something that's coming very quickly. I think it's quick in terms of history, yes, but quick not in the next year or two.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. I do want to dive into your theory of this global bust in a moment, but before we do, I want to touch on silver here because silver nowhere near its all-time highs. To call it a disappointment for many is kind of an understatement. It has had quite a lackluster performance since the last time it was at its all-time high around 2011. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on silver. Do you view it as a similar asset to gold at this point? Has it become more of an industrial metal in your view? What are your thoughts on silver and how it could potentially perform up ahead?
I think silver still is poor man's gold. So it does have some of the characteristics of gold, but it also does have more of an industrial, piece to it. So, yeah, it's been, I think it's an understatement to say it's been a disappointment. It's certainly been kind of the asset that has just not performed for a long time, and has disappointed lots of us, including me, over a long period of time. I do think you have to kind of step back though and realize, because I think a lot of the bears on silver, or those that were bullish and got really beat up by it, they they think it's been, since 2011 nothing's happened. Well, you had a pretty good run in certainly the silver miners and in silver in 2016. You had a very fast big run coming out of the pandemic. March 2020 ran to August 2020 with a really big run there, and then from there it's been a really difficult slog. So it's been consolidating. A lot of the problem, I think, has been the dollar, and it just, silver gets hit a lot harder than gold when it's, in that period of strong dollar. So I think it's all set up now, um, where you've come down to some very important support lines, technically, where fundamentally silver is, because of EV, et cetera, silver is going to be in demand. There's, it's a metal that's going to be in short supply. Um, and it does have the characteristics of when gold runs to 3,000, it's going to get a bid. So I have a pretty aggressive forecast pre-bust again, of $60, which may seem unbelievable given what we've dealt with this last decade, but $60 between now and the bust. And then, and I've said if it breaks above 60, you could run to 75 very quickly. So 60 is my target, but 75 wouldn't surprise me. And then it will get hit harder than gold in the bust. So what that means, if we, you don't know whether we're going to 60 or 75 or 50 or whatever. If I'm right, it goes to 60 plus. You could see it back here certainly, in the bust. And given it's, how easily it can move down, you might even see it down into the teens. So I do think people have to be aware it's not a straight line post bust, because of what I see coming as a huge commodity cycle. Post bust, I think silver could get to $500, gold could get to 20,000. But people just have to understand it's not a straight line. There's this bust in between. As I say, it's like standing on the south rim of the Grand Canyon and looking across to the north rim and thinking you can walk straight across, and obviously you can't. We're going to have that big canyon in between. So, those that think you want to own silver or gold and just hold it right on through, particularly silver, understand what you're doing if you do that, because it's going to be painful.